First of all, can I welcome you to Extraordinary Change, Visual Arts Education Looking to the Future, our 2013 conference. I'm Rod Clark, I'm the Chair of Engage, and as I said, I'm delighted to welcome you here today. A lot of you will already have got something of a taste of the activities which are going on throughout the city over the last, this morning and yesterday afternoon, which I know will be really important context for what we'll be discussing during the conference. The conference itself has a pretty packed agenda, so I don't want to hang about at all and just allow things to begin. But the first thing to do is to introduce James Sillis and programs. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rod. And good afternoon. Welcome to the Engage 2013 conference and to Birmingham. I'm really delighted that we're able to have our conferences here in Birmingham. As many of you know, because I've been reminding everybody, I've worked in the city in the 1980s and 1990s, both at the old Icon Gallery but also on public art and community programmes. And we really wanted to have the conference in Birmingham this year because it feels like a city not only with the most amazing cultural and arts and education activities going on, but also a city that is embracing change, both in its current work and looking towards the future. Many of you, like me, have been taking part in the conference sprint, which has been fantastic, really exciting. And we're really grateful to our partners, not just in Birmingham, but across the West Midlands, who've been sharing their practice. And I'd particularly like to thank colleagues from ICON, so Simon Taylor, who you'll be meeting in a while, because he's kindly volunteered to share a session, but also Kate Self, and ICON intern, Liz Howe. So thank you all very much for supporting the Fringe, and for you for all taking part. As Rod said, and as I hope you know, the theme of this year's conference is all about change within the arts and educational sectors, and there's certainly been plenty of it. What I've really enjoyed is working with colleagues in the Engage team, developing ideas for the conference, but also with you, with Engage Council and Engage Board. But it's also been a great privilege working with this year's programmers, Sarah Mosbert and Miranda Millwall, who are going to talk in a moment about the ideas that underpin their plan and their programme for conference. And I feel that Miranda and Sarah have responded brilliantly to what's a very broad and challenging theme. They've really thought hard about all the changes which are happening within the visual arts and education, not only across the UK, but drawing on international examples as well. And I think have drawn in a very interesting way from their experience as practitioners, as trade artists, as colleagues who worked within formal education and within gallery education. So today, this afternoon, we're going to be looking at some of the impact that change within the education sector is having on the way that children, in particular young people and children, engage with culture. And then we're going to be looking at some international examples of practice and hopefully finding commonalities and drawing from those in a really inspiring way, I hope. And then tomorrow, after the breakouts in the morning, we're going to have a chance really to think about new strategies and new ways of thinking, and I think that's going to be very exciting and positive. Sarah and Miranda have also thought a lot about some of the other challenges which I think impact on all of our work. So, for example, demographic change, really thinking about the role that older people can play within the cultural sector. And I've thought also about other issues which are very current, for example, what the contribution that culture and the arts can have to society's well-being. So some really interesting issues, I think, to be explored in some of the breakouts tomorrow morning. There are a really huge range of contributors to this year's conference, all with important things to say. artists, participants in projects, educators, policymakers and future thinkers. But most important of all, we want to make sure that you have plenty of time to think about what's being discussed and lots of time to reflect on some of the issues which are touched on by contributors and during the breakouts. So we've tried to make sure that we've built in lots of time for you to discuss ideas as they come up with each other around these round tables, but also as you travel to your breakouts tomorrow morning, and there's lots of time as well for you to talk to contributors and ask them questions. I know how important that part of the process is. So I'm just going to do a few thank yous, as I always do. So first of all, I'd like to thank my amazing engaged team. So Rose, Alba, Alex, Deborah, and Susanna, who's been helping us as an intern over the last few weeks. They've all been absolutely amazing, so thank you to them. I'd also like to thank Engage's media partner, Axis. We've worked with Axis over a number of conferences now, and the CBSO Centre for hosting us so well today and tomorrow. I'd like to thank all the contributors. It's great having such a broad range of contributors from across the UK and colleagues coming from outside of the UK. You bring the most incredible expertise and knowledge, and I think I've been very impressed by the way you've really engaged in a dialogue about the theme of conference with Sarah and Miranda. It's been so impressive and really, really interesting to observe. We're very grateful for the support of the British Council with this event, but I'd really like to thank our funders, so Arts Council England, Creative Scotland and Arts Council Wales, because you all make Engage's work possible and so enable us to have events like this. So thank you so much. So I'm just going to do a tiny bit of housekeeping and then hand over. If there's a fire alarm, we have to assume that it's genuine. The fire exits are all marked quite clearly. The assembly point is the main door that you came into. CBSO staff will be around to direct. Toilets are on either side of the foyer. Staff and volunteers all have bright yellow badges on, and apparently, I don't have a clipboard, but apparently everyone else has a clipboard, so you'll be able to spot engaged staff and volunteers. We are documenting the conference with photography and filming, and if you wish to tweet, there should, I think on the holding slide, be the hashtag that you need, which is hashtag ENGCONF13, and the Wi-Fi password is CBSO guest. But if you have any issues about any of that, find a member of staff. So that's a housekeeping. It's a real pleasure to invite Sarah and Miranda to say a few words about the conference. Thank you.
Thank you for your introduction, Jane. This welcoming introduction is from both myself and Sarah, and we're going to each read a part of it. So hello and welcome again to the Engage 2013 conference. We've been planning and programming the conference since May this year, and it's both thrilling and slightly daunting to finally be here in Birmingham with you all. We very much hope that you will enjoy what we have programmed for you, and we look forward to meeting and speaking with as many of you as possible over the coming days. As practicing freelance gallery educators, Sarah and I both have similar professional backgrounds. Having studied fine art, we both became secondary school teachers and from there moved into gallery education. Between us, we have a wealth of experience working both in museums and galleries and as freelancers. The conference themes were developed from our interests and experiences, and it's been fascinating to have the opportunity to research and bring together our ideas for conference. We have constructed a programme which we hope will address the significant and often rapid changes we are currently facing within the arts, culture and education sector within the UK.
Just to welcome you all as well. This conference doesn't present one theme. Instead, it seeks to examine a number of current themes and topics within a national and international context. At a time of austerity and change, we have aimed to bring together a pool of expertise, not only in terms of the speakers, but delegates too, to exchange thoughts, ideas and information in order to appreciate and value the work of the sector as a whole. We're very keen to enable everyone to actively participate within discussions, and hence this roundtable format, to exchange ideas and information, whether via Twitter, asking questions, or during the roundtable discussions. As you all no doubt have noticed, we're delighted to have graphic facilitator Joel Cooper documenting this afternoon's proceedings. We hope you had an opportunity to brief Joel with your hot topic at lunchtime and that you enjoy his record of events today. If you didn't have a chance to see Joel at lunchtime, do catch him during the tea break. Joel's only with us for today, but he's going to be sending us, we hope, all works from a technical point of view, sending us some of the sort of things that he's captured from today for us to have a look at tomorrow as a sort of start and a backdrop to tomorrow's sessions. The conference is structured around three keynote exchanges. We absolutely knew from the start that at some point in the conference we needed to acknowledge, share and discuss what's happening in visual arts within formal education, and especially within schools where cultural entitlement is under threat. The educational landscape has changed almost daily since we started our planning. In fact, it's been really difficult to kind of keep pace with what's happening. And from the free schools to new national curriculum to the most recent pronouncement, well, it's probably not the most recent now, but that it's all to do with genetics anyway. In Exchange 1, we're looking at how can the sector make sense of these changes and maximise our impact and look to the future. Exchange 2 seeks to look at how three of our overseas colleagues have adapted to change. We've explored this by looking at Denmark, which has had a similar recent experience to the UK, with funded support, which has benefited previously from a level of publicly funded support, which we had until recently become accustomed to as well in the UK. And finally, looking to oh, sorry, I've missed something out. I've moved on too quickly. We're looking at Hungary as well, and which has had a very different background, not having those sort of levels of support. And then finally to India, one of the world's new economic superpowers. How is gallery education practice developing there at a time of increased cultural consumption? We're keen to look at the situation in China, and we're very pleased that it's being explored through one of the breakout sessions centred on Chow Fei's current exhibition at Eastside Project. In Exchange 3, we look at innovation, entrepreneurship and sustainability, three keywords which we're hearing increasingly within our sector. Here we're trying to look quite widely, even beyond gallery education sector, to investigate a range of examples which examine our core values as well as models for partnership working. We could have devoted the whole of the conference just to the areas that we're exploring in this section. We're thrilled to have programmed 8 exciting breakout sessions which develop the conference themes further and allow for rich discussion and participatory opportunities. We've been very fortunate to have fantastic support from Birmingham-based partners and venues in realising our programme. Having embarked on the huge process of programming a conference in such fast-moving times, we hope that with the 37 presenters involved, we've managed to explore many of the key concerns at the moment. We hope that the Extraordinary Change Conference will be a time to take stock of not only the challenges of where we are at present, but also to suggest positive and constructive ways forward. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thinking behind conference. It's a real pleasure to introduce Dr. Emery Pringle, who's Head of Learning Practice and Research at TAPE, and she's chairing the first of our 3 exchanges.
Thank you. Is this it's on. Everyone hears. Great. Yes, so I'm Emily. Very, very pleased to be here, and it's a fantastic panel that you're going to be hearing from. I'm going to keep my section really short. Just to pick up on the theme that's already surfacing, that within formal education across the UK, there is a bewildering amount of change going on. I think colleagues who come from England are very conscious, I think, of the almost daily pronouncements that come from the Department for Education, but colleagues in Scotland and Wales, I think, will also be aware that there is also a significant amount of change happening there, possibly, arguably, from our perspective, on a more positive trajectory. But that's something that we're going to pick up and explore in the sessions, the presentations that you're going to hear now. Just to think about, just to focus a bit on kind of what the situation is in England, because I think one of the things that I and colleagues that I've spoken to find very difficult is that not only is there an enormous amount of change, but there is then change to the change. So it's very, very difficult to get a sense of actually what's happening. And when I spoke to Joan just recently, she said, well, actually, that's very similar to what's happening in Scotland, that there is just change going on. So what I think we'd like to do in these presentations is to lay out in very sort of broad brush terms what's happening in terms of kind of policy. And then obviously we're not going to have the chance to go into that in detail, but to sort of pose a few or throw out some ideas which you then within the session that follows that, where you're going to have conversations and discussions at your tables, will have an opportunity to pick up and explore. I think one of the things that we felt really strongly about is that this could be an opportunity for us to vent our frustration and rage, certainly what's happening, I think, in England, but that actually perhaps more productively it's an opportunity for us to really think about what we can do with the situation, and to try and think creatively about how we can work with schools from within galleries and support young people to continue to engage with and study art. With that in mind, we've got some fantastic speakers to help us on that journey. We've got 4 speakers. I'm just going to introduce very briefly and say who they are. Our first speaker is Leslie Butterworth, who's the General Secretary of NSEAD, and Leslie's going to explain what NSEAD is, so I'm not going to. And then after Leslie, we will have Lizzie Crump, who comes from the Cultural Learning Alliance. After that, we've got Joan Parr, who's the Portfolio Manager for Creative Scotland, and then following Joan, we've got Laura Ford, who's an artist. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Leslie to speak. Thanks very much.
Can everyone hear me? Yes, that sounds like you can. Indeed, I'm Leslie Butterworth from NSEAD, the National Society for Education, Art and Design, and it's a real privilege to be talking to you today about what we're trying to do on behalf of our teachers. Just a quick sort of introduction to who we are. We're the leading national authority for art, craft and design education to all phases of education throughout the UK. Our aims are to promote and defend art, craft and education, to look after our teachers. And we're a membership organisation, very similar in structure to Engage, and we're also part of a community of subject associations. You'll be aware that every subject on the curriculum has its own subject association that looks after its teachers, particularly the history teachers are part of the Historical Association, the geography teachers part of the Geographical Association. So we are one of many subject associations. And in 2010, in England, the department chose to review the national curriculum as part of their white paper, The Importance of Teaching. And alongside the review of the national curriculum, we also had to contend with the English Baccalaureate, changes to initial teacher education, and of course austerity measures in the cultural sector. And during 2010 and 11, we contributed, as indeed did Engage, to a consultation to say why art and design should be on the national curriculum at all. And I'll just give you a quote from our HMI in Middleton, who will always sort of remind us, when we're getting too enthusiastic, that art and design does not have the divine right to be on the curriculum, and we must always defend it. Then from 2011 to 13, again alongside Engage, we took part in a tranche of round tables and one-to-ones with members of the curriculum, the department team, joined by colleagues from the Cultural Learning Alliance, the Arts Council, teachers and gallery educators. Last October, with 2 days' notice in the department, we set up a rapid response team from our members to answer specific questions given to us from the department about art and design. In 2012, we contributed to a second consultation about what we actually wanted to see on the curriculum. And there was an unusual moment, again, sort of late last year, when I was phoned up by one of the curriculum review team to say, the ministers have noted that design appears 2 times on the curriculum, in design technology and art and design. Can you explain why? So they also phoned up the Design Technology Association, so we both, Richard Green and myself, sort of put our heads together and prepared a joint paper within sort of, I think, about 6 days, and went up to the department to kind of explain this. And that seemed to sort of go without too much note. A last sort of hurried consultation happened in August. There was some sort of flurry of phone calls, and then the curriculum was basically sort of lost to us. And it's been released out into the wild now in September, and we do actually know what we've got. And as we sort of met and kind of talked and persuaded and sort of wrung our hands, the draft for the art and design curriculum sort of waxed and waned around our ears. Very early drafts were really quite sort of dire. We had the sort of white dead male cliche. We had Michelangelo and Leonardo and Palladio, and sort of quite bizarrely Jonathan Ive, who fortunately wasn't dead at the time. We sort of said no, we don't want a canon, we don't want sort of artists mentioned and named. We want teachers to be able to choose their significant artists, makers and designers. There was a particularly sort of anxious moment, I think just before Christmas last year, when actually craft was sort of seemed to disappear from a draft. And that was a very sort of anxious moment, and indeed I think the Crafts Council were very active in restoring that entire discipline. To summarise, I think we all know what we've got now. It's sort of been circulated pretty well. What we could have been given could have been a lot worse. And yes, we were consulted, and yes, we've been listened to, but we've decided to write our own because it's just not good enough. And what the current curriculum, from our own point of view, and when I say our own point of view, I mean all of the teachers that subscribe to NSCAD, it lacks is the contemporary and the future, it lacks digital and new media and technologies, and it lacks the impact and content and context of the cultural sector and creative industries. So over the summer, once we realised where we were, we set up a curriculum writing group and considered the tensions and challenges of actually writing a subject curriculum. Question, who is it for? Answer, a very broad audience of generalist and specialist teachers, governors, parents, gallery educators, and of course the students themselves. What we couldn't do was write a sort of an amazing curriculum for highly specialist teachers. It has to be inclusive to everyone. A very kind of solitary exercise is when we sort of saw the first big curriculum document with all the subjects in, was I think the subjects before art is physics. Now, I'm not a physics teacher. To actually look at some of the words and concepts in that curriculum is really quite frightening. So what we're trying to do is work for the generalist. So we began by deciding on a simple conceptual framework, just actually, what we want the curriculum to achieve. And this can be entered at any point. So very simply, for our own sort of use really, enable children to talk about what they have done and why, enable children to generate ideas, and enable children to realise ideas in a tangible form. Now what we've produced is in fact a web resource, and it will be available on the NSCAD website and the public side of the site almost next week. Now, we've sort of cunningly used the Department of Education version as a model and a starting point to give teachers permission to use it. So the department version is in fact a front of house, behind which we've added 2 layers of more meaningful information and material, hopefully balanced enough and inspirational enough and explanatory enough and open-ended enough for both expert and generalist alike. So this is the department purpose of study. It's not actually that bad, but it's their starting point, and it's our starting point, and we've subverted it. Now this is ours. Basically on our sort of website, you will see the department, and then you can click, and ours will sort of leap out at you. And just to kind of illustrate how we're doing it, the words that we've actually used are in red. So you'll see the department purpose of study, and then ours will sort of pop up. So it's kind of pop-up curriculum. And we've done the same as we move through the curriculum. That's the purpose of study, and we've done the same with the aims. The department aims produce creative work, exploring their ideas and recording their experiences. Well, that's sort of fairly humdrum, really. So our interpretation, again, we're bringing in our sort of conceptual framework now, factoring in that. So you'll see the black DFE aim, and then ping, click, and you'll get sort of our own aim underneath. Likewise with this one, all pupils become proficient in drawing, painting, sculpture, and other art, craft and design techniques. Again, our response is underpinned by our conceptual framework. And the kind of challenge with this one is that it really sort of focuses on fine art. Now, there's nothing wrong with fine art. Fine art is fantastic. Painting, drawing, sculpture, wonderful. But we need to ensure the depth and breadth and value of our subject. So craft and design has to be in there, and to really sort of scope these subjects. I mean, craft isn't in our subject title. Legislation would take, we'd have to have legislation to get craft into our subject title, and there's no appetite for that at the moment. But we need to sort of really ensure the depth of our subject. And again, another department aim, and it's self-worthy, but at this point we're trying to factor in the museum and gallery sector. So you can see where we sort of brought that in. We want to sort of really get our teachers and encourage our teachers to start to sort of, see where they can sort of find the resources for the curriculum. And again, know about great artists, craftsmakers and designers. Not an unreasonable aim in itself. I mean, we were very anxious about the word great. We had lots of conversations. We wanted to remove the word great and replace it with the word significant. We sort of failed in our mission there. But again, trying to move the museum and gallery sector into the curriculum. And again, key stage 1, again, bringing in the museum and gallery sector. Now, I've given you our first layer of information. We have 2 sets of words, if you like, the red words and now the blue words. Under the red layer, we've created a 3rd layer of meaning and detail, where our teachers can really sort of drill down into the subject. In the blue text, we've begun to populate the curriculum. So who are these artists, craftspeople and designers? Well, they're potters, ceramicists, weavers, systems designers, book designers, typographers. And again, moving into the sort of the greater depth of meaning, trying to be sort of more explicit about the benefits of learning in the subject, and again, bringing in the museum and gallery sector. And then finally, sort of putting in disciplines. It's not just about painting. This entire key stage 3, privileges painting. So we're putting in the crafts, textiles, digital, and lens-based media. There's a glossary of terms, again, looking at sort of all the different words. So you can click onto sort of adhesive or prototype or sketchbook, click on any word that you don't quite understand, and then that would be explained again. And also linked back into the sort of health and safety site part of our site. We're also using the glossary to be sort of subvert a little bit, to try and oppose orthodoxy really, in terms of looking at sketchbooks. They're not just white books full of white sheets of paper. They can be handmade, they can be virtual. I think I just got got to the end of my time. One more minute. Basically, I hope you'll use it. I hope you will sort of feed back to it. What we are going to move onto from this is progression and assessment, which are two further issues. Levels have gone, but there's nothing in its place, so that's something we need to work on. We're also going to populate it with models of good practice, not the QCA schemes of work, but actually real live models of good practice. And we'd like some from the gallery sector. And now I think I'll conclude.
Many thanks, Leslie. That's a great sense of what the curriculum is and even more importantly what the curriculum could be. I'd now like to introduce Lizzie, who's going to give us a kind of broad sense of what's been going on.
I'm going to try. A whistle-stop tour of policy. Is everybody all right if I present from sitting down? Is that okay? Does everyone hear me and see me? Wave if you can't. So, I'm Lizzie Crump and I run the Cultural Learning Alliance. And I know lots of colleagues are already deeply involved in the CLA and work with us, but I'll just give a quick 1 minute overview for those who aren't. So the Cultural Learning Alliance came into being about 3 years ago. And we came off the back of a report that was commissioned by some philanthropists and crayons and government departments looking at how the education and the cultural worlds could come together to be more proactive, more effective, start to have the same kind of language used, that kind of thing. Really interestingly, we came into being almost at the same time as we got a new government. So the sort of work of the Alliance has naturally fallen into looking at this bewildering, as Emily said, absolutely unprecedented levels of change in terms of policy landscape, practical landscape, practice that's happened over the UK in that time. Now, I'm going to focus mostly on England because that's been where we've sort of been pulled in terms of looking at government change and talking about it. But I'll try and throw in some references to Scotland and Wales as well as we can, and we'll talk about that a bit later if you'd like to. It really has been a fascinating process, and I'm going to spend the next sort of 12, 13 minutes talking about some of the key headlines of policy change that we're working with, that we're consulting on, that are coming into being and that are emerging. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the curriculum, sort of beyond art design, so you get a bit of an idea of the shape of how the curriculum holds together. A little bit on school accountability, so how are schools being judged by government? What are the things that they have to be proving that they're delivering against? A little bit on GCSE reform, which is the big thing that's hitting us at the moment. A little bit on A-levels. And then talk a little bit about the wider landscape and some of the opportunities that I think we all have in working with it. So I'll start with the curriculum, and I think the really interesting way to start with the curriculum is to look at the purpose of the national curriculum that sits at the top of that document. I don't know how many colleagues have read it, but it sort of talks very much about introducing young people to the best that's been thought and written. And that sort of gives you a clue into the theme of the whole curriculum. It's that sort of old model of young people are vessels that are there to be filled with knowledge. And that word knowledge is absolutely key. It runs the whole way through the curriculum. What it sort of talks about is the facts and the things that young people should know in order to be successful and to progress. Very, very interesting that those words success and achievement and progression also have some real nuance in that curriculum. It's a lot about progressing into the workforce or progressing into a Russell Group university education. And those seem to be the two routes that the curriculum has been developed by. And if colleagues are interested, there was a speech that Liz Truss, Minister for Schools, gave about 3 weeks, a month ago to the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, where she makes that quite explicit. She sort of talks about an economic model of that workforce, where actually what she feels that the UK needs to be competing in against other countries is a workforce where you've got very high-level jobs, engineering jobs, maths jobs, technology jobs, and you've got sort of a labour market supporting underneath that. And in the model that she talks about, she sort of calls it an hourglass, and she talks about the jobs in the middle being squeezed. So fewer middle-range jobs, fewer management jobs, few of those jobs in the middle, and she sort of says, what we've done, and this is a direct quote, is we have readjusted the curriculum towards the high-value subjects. And she goes on to name English, maths, science, technology, design, modern foreign languages within that. She doesn't name, very obviously, the art subjects within it. So it's worth a bit of a read to get some of that context to where the curriculum came from. So exactly as Leslie said, the last 18 months have been really the most phenomenal round of consultation on that national curriculum. I think the Cultural Learning Alliance, we wrote 5 submissions over that 18-month period of time on various things. We work across all art forms, and in terms of the curriculum, so we generally look at art and design, we work across design technology, we look at dance, drama, we look at music, we look at English literature, and we also look at history. What we try and do is work with all the subject specialist associations and organisations like Engage and amplify the voice of the specialists that work within them. So we did manage to make some change. It was a process where we had some good dialogue with the civil service. As Leslie said, some of those conversations are astounding. I think I had a 2-hour conversation once about whether the word film could be introduced into the national curriculum, and let me tell you that it did not get in there. And that's one of the things that to really look at in terms of the thematics of it. Film, digital, really lacking across the whole document. And interestingly, when we'll come to GCSEs in the English literature spec, the proposals for the English literature GCSE were actually that you couldn't have digital text included. They were actually specifically excluded from that document. So that's really missing, and particularly that sort of film literacy and that digital literacy doesn't sit within the curriculum framework. Colleagues in dance, really very disappointed with the way that dance is represented. It is within the PE strand of the curriculum, but it's talked about only in terms of movement. So all those things around the aesthetics of dance as an art form, around choreography, about understanding dance, being part of dance, they don't figure at all in the document. It just talks about increasingly complex movements within the key stages. Music's not bad. It's similar to art and design in that it moved to do a little bit more in recognising young people's agency as musicians, as them as practitioners. But that whole theme of actually it's not about what people know, it's about the skills they have, the competencies they have, the understanding that they have, and that recognition that young people are artists and makers and creators. And hopefully, as we would all want, they're going to go away and create better than the best that's been thought and written. The best is still before us, I think, is something that we really have to hold on to when we read that document. So that's kind of the landscape. Drama went through a really bumpy ride. Drama was stripped out in the first draft of the National Curriculum for English. It used to sit within speaking and listening, and any colleagues that have read that English draft will know that speaking and listening was removed at one point completely, so it's just reading and writing. It's now been reinstated, but its status is very, very different. It's not assessed in the same way. The framework is not there with sort of progress detailed underneath it. It's just some headlines saying that it's important. But very happily within those headlines, drama is now mentioned. So there is something in the national curriculum saying every child and young person should have access to high quality drama and theatre, and we were really pleased to see that was there. Have I missed any of them out? Design technology is pretty good, it's pretty robust. That lobby did really well and managed to do a significant rewrite of that specification. So that was great. History, again, huge changes. I don't know if colleagues saw it in the press. The first specifications for history are very much a list of people and places that people should know, mostly great figures from history. A little bit of movement has happened in that, which is actually quite good, particularly for museums and gallery sector, in that it now does recognise that you can do local projects and local study and start with something on your doorstep. Because the real problem with the chronological history specification as it was laid out were things like, you might do the Romans once when you were 6. And then you wouldn't necessarily revisit it again. So if you happen to have a fantastic Roman collection, you may suddenly be faced with only having 6-year-olds coming to visit you from schools because it wouldn't appear again. But that local element has been introduced, as has a better sort of slightly wider concept of history, where it looks a little bit beyond what is termed in the curriculum as our island story, which is very, very much the core of that specification. So that's kind of where we are with curriculum. I think, as Leslie said, the important thing to note with it is that we've got it now. The changes have happened. We've all flung in as much of our two pennies worth as we possibly can. And it's now for all of us to try and make that breathe and make it work and try and find ways of including the subtlety and complexity of what we might mean when we use words like technologies to help teachers to interpret that in the widest possible way. So I'm going to speed on in my whistle-stop tour to school accountability. So February, cast your minds to February last year. I've got 5 minutes. Exciting. When the EBAC was talked about by Michael Gove on a podium in the House of Commons. And he stood up and he said, "Oh, my plans on the EBAC, I may have gone a stage too far. I may not do them." It's very important to note that it absolutely still remains. He was talking about something slightly different, which was a rebranding of GCSEs. The EBAC is a school accountability measure where schools are judged by how young people achieve across a suite of subjects, which are English, maths, science, modern foreign languages, and then a humanity, which is either history or geography. That league table, which is what it is still remains, schools still are judged by it, and it is having a profound effect in secondary schools on the provision that schools are able to offer. So we've done a bit of work in terms of the CLA on crunching some of the numbers that are available to see what impact it's actually had, and it is quite shocking. There were some figures from 2012 from Ipsos Mori about the effect of the EBAC. And looking at those, we could see that actually schools with high proportion of free school meals are twice as likely to withdraw an art subject than those with a low proportion of free school meals. So we can see that the EBAC is really affecting the most disadvantaged in that area. We can see that since 2010, when the EBAC has been introduced, actually until now, there has been a 14% drop in uptake of art subjects across the piece. And my colleague Sam, who is the research specialist in the CLA, into account all those things about cohort size and made sure she's looked at the figures really robustly, and that's the case. So we still have the EBAC. We have a new school accountability measure, and this is where we get very technical, so I'll try and be as clear as possible. We used to have a thing where secondary schools were judged by a floor standard of how many GCSEs they got at A to C, and they had to have 5 different GCSEs at A to C, and they were judged on whether they could do that. We now have a much more complex measure called, for ease of use, 8 best. So schools are now going to be judged on how young people do across a suite of 8 GCSEs. Now, they're going to be judged in 2 ways. One is purely on attainment, so what grades young people get on those 8 GCSEs. And the second one, a bit more complex, is a progress measure. So it's on how they've progressed when they start secondary school up to they take their GCSE. Now, there's a couple of issues and things that sit under that measure which we need to take into account. One is that the EBAC subjects have to be included within those 8. So it's got to be English, maths, and then 3 others. Now, in reality, if you say the EBAC has to be included, that's pretty much 7 out of your 8 subjects, because English is generally 2. You generally do English language and English literature, though that is changing. And science, you generally do 2 or 3 in terms of science, in terms of GCSE. So even though it looks on the surface like 8 best is something which could recognise fantastic arts achievement, it's worth burying underneath and seeing that actually it's still quite structured towards those other subjects. So given we are in this sort of place of disincentive, what are the opportunities? What can we do to be absolutely championing the place of arts and culture and creativity in schools? I think the best possible thing we can do is be positive. You know, teachers are being told, on one hand, these are all the things that you absolutely have to be working towards and measuring and looking and showing us that you can do. But on the other hand, they're being told, you've got freedom to do whatever you like. Become an academy, become a free school, make up your own curriculum. There's space there to do what you want to do. And I think as the cultural sector, we have to grasp that and say, choose arts. It's brilliant. It's irresistible. We've got fantastic evidence, and Engage has got tons of evidence. Cultural Learning Alliance has got tons of evidence. Come and look on our website, where we're able to say this is really valuable to children and young people. It's really valuable to schools. Actually, if you include a brilliant, broad and balanced cultural offer in your school, it will help with Ofsted, it will help with your attainment, it will help with your delivery. And what I think is the danger is if we get overwhelmed by this sort of disincentive, then the only messages that our teaching colleagues hear is one of, we're being asked not to do the arts. We've got to convince them that it's brilliant and it's fantastic and it's important. There's a couple of tiny things. I know I've got 1 minute. I'm being waved up. Schools have been asked to publish a local curriculum to their school, their own school curriculum, on their website for the first time. It's a new bit of legislation. I think there's a real opportunity for cultural organisations to help those schools draft and develop those local curriculums, to go in and say, you've got to do something for this, let's help, let's devise it together. And we should definitely do that. And lastly, I think we've got to call on our government to be more vocal about asserting the value of culture. And interestingly, there was a document that the Welsh government produced, an arts and education review recently, where the first recommendation is assert the importance of arts and culture and creativity in your school. And that's what we want to be calling on them to do, is to make some of those really clear statements that say, we'll do this, it's important. Okay?
Fantastic. Lizzie, that was absolutely incredible. You have managed to compress, which is something that I still struggle to get my head around all of the different things that are going on, but that's fantastic. Thank you. And now I'd like to hand over to Joan Parr, who's going to give us a view from north of the border, slightly different.
Very, very different. Thank you. Yeah. I've just been scribbling here and changing what I'm going to say as I've been listening to what the previous two speakers have said, because it is incredibly different in Scotland. You'll be aware that we have a completely separate and distinct education system. And I think, again, the policy context has been on a significant journey. I mean, I'm talking about arts and education here in particular. Significant change has happened over the last 8 years. And I'm just going to try again and compress that into 15 minutes and give you a bit of an overview of what the context is at the moment. There are a couple of caveats which I'll come to, but it is generally speaking a much happier story than the one I've just heard. So if we cast our minds back 8 years, and it is also, the common strand here is incredible rate of change. But I think the significant difference is that the change in Scotland tends to be going all in the same direction, and from our shared context and thinking, a good direction. So I'll tell you a little bit about the journey we've been on and where we currently are, and in particular where we are this week, because there's lots happening this week. So if we cast our minds back about 8 years, we had a situation which you'll be very familiar with. We had the arts sector, and in the context of the arts sector, education and learning tended to be a bit of a bolt-on and a bit of an extra when there was money available, blah, 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 you know that story. I am generalising hugely here, excuse me. And then we had the education sector, which also saw the arts as a bit of a bolt-on to the education. And of course, the arts world reported to the culture minister, and the education world reported to the education minister. And of course, that you're all aware of the sort of divisions and barriers that scenario set up. Then about 8 years ago, the education world started to rethink the purpose of education. There was a big national debate about education. There was a lot of discontent among the teaching profession about our previous curriculum, which was called 5 to 14. It was thought to be too prescriptive. Teachers wanted it to be loosened up a bit. They wanted more opportunity for their professional expertise to have a role. So the whole thing was rethought, and what they came up with in terms of what was the purpose of education was entirely different from the best that has been thought and written. It was not about knowledge, much more rebalancing it to be about knowledge and skills. So they came up with the purpose of education was to enable all young people to be 4 things, if I can remember them: successful learners, responsible citizens, responsible citizens, effective contributors, and confident individuals. That's right, those 4 things. That was the purpose of education. So you can see immediately that our sort of, our profession, our way of thinking fits wonderfully within that context. So that was really good news. Immediately then, we started working with the education agencies to see how we could contribute as a creative sector more to that, how we could make more of this aspiration a reality. Now, I want you to, I just want to read, I wasn't going to do this, but I want to read you a little bit out of this very latest document, which you can download for free from the Creative Scotland website and probably the Education Scotland website as well. It's called What is Creativity? It was published just in September. There was a previous iteration of this, but we've been working on it over the last couple of years, and this is the latest hot off the press iteration. I'll just read you a snippet from the ministerial foreword. Says, we know that creativity is vital in the world of work, with greater opportunities for those who bring a creative approach. The country as a whole stands to benefit significantly from the wealth of creative talent that our people can bring to bear. The ability to solve problems by approaching things slightly differently, the readiness to discover new things for yourself, and openness to new ideas, these are all aspects of creativity which stand people in excellent stead in their lives as a whole, within work and beyond. And I think there are 3 themes that we can see going through all the strategic developments that I want to mention, because this is just one of them. And the 3 themes I would say where there is an increasing recognition across public policy of the value of arts and creativity. The second one is there is a disintegration of silos and barriers at all levels of national life, subject areas, school curriculum, all the rest of it. I think that's another significant development. And I think there's also an increasing importance of partnership working, and partnership working again at every level and across professions and across public life. So I think those are 3 key themes that we can see iterated through all the strategies that I'm going to mention. Curriculum for Excellence is one of them. So Curriculum for Excellence is now being implemented in all the schools in Scotland with varying degrees of success, it has to be said. You can imagine the education world is a kind of huge juggernaut, and it does take a long time to turn. There are huge issues. But I'm talking very much at strategic level here, so please don't think for a minute that this wonderful world is happening in every school in Scotland. It isn't. But this is the trajectory, this is the journey that we're on. We've been on it for a number of years, and the national agencies are all bought into this. Another thing I think that's significant to mention is that the local authorities have to report to government on what we call single outcome agreements. So they have a list of outcomes that they have to report their success or how they have achieved these outcomes to central government in Scotland. And I think it's quite significant that it doesn't say in those single outcome agreements that as a local authority you have to deliver the curriculum. It does not say that. It does say you've got to report on how you are fulfilling those 4 capacities. So how are you enabling young people to be confident individuals, successful learners, responsible citizens, and effective contributors? And that's quite significant because it's not just schools' responsibility to do that. It is schools working with social work, housing, police, museums and galleries and all the rest of it. So I think that is quite a significant shift as well. So the philosophy behind Curriculum for Excellence, I think, is great. It's very enlightened. Part of our current situation, part of the issue that we're dealing with is managing that change. So it's keeping things on track across public life that is heading in this direction, how do we manage to do that as silos are breaking down, you know, as all this changes in the system? Because this has all happened in a context where every organisation that was there 8 years ago has probably merged with another one, downsized, changed its remit. All that stuff is going on in the background. So, Creative Learning Plan. This is this document. Another very significant thing about this, which I am delighted about, is it has been signed off by 3 ministers: the Education Cabinet Secretary, the Culture Cabinet Secretary, and the Minister for Skills. Now, that's a huge benefit to us. You know, it's not just about reporting to the Culture Minister anymore, it's the Education and Skills as well. The other thing that's very significant is that all the national education organisations and Creative Scotland have been working together to develop this. They've all agreed on a vision. I'll just read you a little bit of that as well. We need a culture that is rich, varied and stimulating. We need politics that are open to debate, reflection and ideas. We need to be able to invent and develop our science and technology. We need to be able to write the poems and stories that reflect and enrich who we are. We need to express that through the visual arts, music, through theatre and dance and through film. And in doing so, we need to eradicate the false demarcation lines between the expressive arts and every other subject. Creative learning and teaching is the most fulfilling route to both deep learning and a rounded adulthood. We need to feel confident in our right and ability to influence change. And I think that's very significant. I really like that. And I like the way also that the political element to this is in here. So it's not just about the arts anymore. It is absolutely the arts being fundamental to society and civic life. You'll also see in this document the range of partners who have committed to this. So it is genuinely all the national education organisations: College Development Network, Education Scotland, General Teaching Council for Scotland, Scottish Qualifications Authority, Skills Development Scotland, and the Association of Directors of Education. So we are delighted with it. It also has work streams, 4 work streams in the back. So all these organisations that I've named have signed up to do specific actions that will contribute to this agenda, which also means, of course, that they are putting money into it and they are investing staff time and staff resources into that agenda, which is great. So that's the Creative Learning Plan. Tonight in Glasgow is being launched another big initiative called Generation, some of you may have heard of, which will launch tonight. It will actually be active 2014, and I know Engage are involved. And it's really a celebration of 25 years of contemporary art in Scotland, looking back at the last 25 years of contemporary art. And it has a particular focus on the engagement of the 12 to 25 age group. So we're looking forward to lots of fantastic activities. There are national partners and agencies involved in that, and there are also, I think, about 50 associated galleries who will be doing projects around engaging the 12 to 25 age group. Tomorrow morning, we're launching the National Youth Arts Strategy. It's the first one we've ever had. And it's very much about bringing the sector together. It's about cross-art form, and it's about cross-professional as well, so not just the arts, but connecting arts to other providers of youth services. So that is also very exciting. There's a range of others which I'm not going to talk about in detail, but for example, we've got also an arts and justice one. We're doing a lot of work in prisons and communities affected by crime, and again, you can find that on the Creative Scotland website. You'll see the Youth Arts Strategy on our website as from tomorrow. We have a youth employment initiative. We have another programme which I'll just mention because I don't think you have this in the rest of the UK, which is called Cashback for Communities, and that's proceeds of crime money. So the money that comes in when assets from criminals are seized, we get part of that to reinvest in communities that have been affected by crime. That we get a culture bit, there's also a bit that's through sport and through various other activities, but some of that is going back into culture. And finally, the last one I'd like to mention is Artwork Scotland, which you may know about because there's stuff happening in England to do with that, and again, Engage are involved. And that's about the kind of flip side of this, so that's about the professional development of artists engaging in participatory practice. So what are the skills they need, what does quality look like, and how do we get those artists more connected? So again, there are these common strands running through all these different strategies. I think the philosophical context and the appetite in Scotland is very, very strong, but we are still struggling our way and navigating through the how to actually manage this. But I do think that we're all on the same journey. So a couple of caveats I mentioned. One is we have to remember the scale of Scotland. You know, we're a small country, but one of the things I'm pleased about is that in that context that I've been describing to you, I think we're working to our strengths there. It is relatively easy for us to get the major players round a table, to get some kind of consensus. Relatively easy, not all that easy. So I think that's an advantage we have. And again, just the caveat, I am talking about strategy level here, and as I say, you won't see this wonderful nirvana in every school in Scotland, but hopefully a couple of years down the road, you will see more and more of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. It is hard to believe that we are two countries effectively so close and yet seemingly so different in lots of ways. But that was really fascinating. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Laura Ford, who's an artist. And Laura's going to talk about her experience, really, of being an artist coming through an education system.
Which is quite ironic, really, because I hated every moment of my education. I was probably dyslexic, although you were called thick in those days. And I think probably from a very early age decided I was going to be an artist from about age 6. I think a teacher said, "Oh, I think she's going to be an artist." And I thought, sounds a good option. But so I went to a convent probably from about age 12. And in those days, I think you were either academic and you were put in those streams, or you were going to be somebody's wife. So you were taught to sew and do domestic science, that kind of thing. And since I didn't fit into either stream, I was quite lucky in that they sort of dumped me in the art room because I was good at that, and that's where I wouldn't cause any trouble. And so I saw the art room as a kind of sanctuary, and I suppose I didn't have much teaching in art, but what I did have was an awful lot of time to do it, huge amount of time to do it, and that was very crucial. Then coming to the sixth form, I think my parents kind of given up on me and just thought, oh, she's got to go to boarding school. Let's find somewhere where she can go that is good at art. So they found me a very good school where I could avoid doing any other subject, but again, spent all my time in the art room. So it was a good department, and we did a lot of drawing. And again, from sort of 9 o'clock till 5 o'clock, all I did was draw and look and think and do art, and that was fantastic for me. Even so, I couldn't stand school anymore, so I left school early and went to the first art school that would take me, which was Bath Academy of Art. In those days, you didn't have to have too many O-levels or A-levels, so I was lucky there. And just enjoyed my time there enormously. Did a foundation and then did sculpture. Even there, though, I was incredibly resistant to any kind of form of education. I've got a kind of perversity to it. I'm very, very resistant. Even though I can educate myself through art, because it opens up so many other subjects, and that's where I found it interesting. So now I find I'm deeply interested in history, but it's only from through a kind of visual medium that I've come to it. I then went on to do my MA at Chelsea, and again had a great time there, but a tricky time. And it was a one-year course, and I just wanted to get through that and get on with life. And then I started practicing as an artist, and I started teaching immediately, which again was ironic because I've gone back into education, but I've thoroughly enjoyed teaching, and in fact was always given the tricky students, the students just like me that refused to be educated. And I taught in art schools probably till about 2000, when I found that I was increasingly hating working in art schools. There were so many forms to fill out. You had to teach in groups. It wasn't one-to-one. It was, I suppose, what I was finding as well is the students were coming in and the ideas were taking precedent to the actual process of making, of doing. And I found that increased enormously. So you'd sit down to a tutorial and you'd talk for 20 minutes about the ideas. And then you'd say, have you got anything to show me? And they'd say, well, no, I'm still working it out, still. And that was becoming more and more prevalent. And I wondered why that was happening. I suppose now I've come to understand it, having had 3 children who then gone through education. I get horrified at the kind of art homework they have, in a way, the kind of hoops they've got to jump through. If I suppose if I'd been doing art now, I'm not sure I would have become an artist particularly, because I don't think I could have fulfilled those projects. I would not have been able to kind of well, I mean, so my third child, he looks at his folder, and you know, you're supposed to start with the idea and progress and look at other artists and do a whole load of research before you actually do the finished artwork. And just like he does, I would have gone straight to the finished artwork and then gone back and kind of filled all that stuff in. I think it's a completely wrong approach to making art, and I wondered if it comes out of as an artist having to kind of justify your existence, the reason for doing it. In a way, a lot of galleries and the education that's come out of galleries is absolutely fantastic. I think that there's amazing programs, but I wonder if it just encourages us to have to kind of defend art so much, and if the defense of art comes out in that sort of justifying why we're doing it. Which is why probably if ever I do engagement with the public, it's always a bit more hands-on. I did a project with my husband called Art Changes Bracknell, in which we set up a kind of workstation outside Sainsbury's, because Bracknell were looking to make some public art. And I thought, because there's so much anger at art usually, it would be great to kind of get people to come up with their ideas and get us, there were a group of artists, get us to actually make and draw their ideas for them. And it was incredibly exciting, because people were very resistant, first of all. People came with their anger and their fury at having money spent on art, and then they'd come up with an idea, and then you'd draw it for them, and then you'd explore it with them through doing, or you'd give them a bit of plasticine and say, oh, well, tell me how your sculpture would work, and you know, how would it get made? We'd go through the whole kind of process of it. And by the end of it, they were incredibly excited, and they really wanted these sculptures to actually be made and be in Bracknell. But of course, the next stage of the project, I don't think there was any money for it, so that kind of fell flat. But I think people do get excited, do get involved with art if they're allowed to sort of take part in a way. Other things I've done are sort of more performance-based, where you're looking at a piece of sculpture, not necessarily through ideas, but through dance, through comedy, through positioning the body, just so that you get a sense of how an object feels and what that feels like, and then ideas coming out of that. So rather than, in a way, telling people how to look at an object, how to look at an artwork, it's getting them to think about their own life, their own feelings, and then come back to the artwork. I suppose I have a bit of with education in galleries, I have a bit of a problem with the amount of kind of idiot boards that are placed within the room where the art object or paintings exist. I think it's really important to keep the two things separate, because I suppose as somebody who has resisted education all through her education, I find that I'm being hectored by that kind of notion that one has to read about it and then look at the work. I think reading about it is easier than actually looking, and I think it's really important to look. So I think somewhere like Turner Contemporary, where they have a fantastic education. What's the word? Program there, but it's kept separate. It's something you allow the art to do its work, and then if you want to go and explore out from there, you go and explore out from there. It's not necessarily stuck in your face. And I think that's really important for me. And I think I'll leave it there.
Great. Laura, thank you very much. It's always good to have a sense of kind of what all the purposes of the policy and everything is in terms of an experience of how you learn art, or what all this is supposed to be about. And actually listening to all the 4 presentations, there are various things that have sort of come into my mind, that more questions actually, the most fundamental one being, what is an education for, particularly thinking about, what you've been talking about, Laura, and what is a curriculum for? And hearing the 2 different perspectives from England and Scotland, and that sense that there is a very different set of values that's underpinning the changes that's going on, and it's worth, I think, thinking about the kind of ideology of everything that's going on. But from that idea of really, what do teachers need to teach? And therefore what, the flip side of that is really, what do young people need to learn? And again, from what you've been talking about, Laura, that sense of what is it that you need to learn if you're going into an art room in a school? And my sense is that both in terms of what's happening in England and in Scotland, is that there are opportunities in both of those scenarios that is presented. And actually, although the focus on kind of acquiring knowledge in the sense that, there is great stuff out there and it's just a question of telling young people about that, you know, on one hand, my immediate reaction is, oh, you know, I feel a bit worried about that. But actually, there is great art out there, and it is really good if young people get to know about that. There's actually nothing wrong with that. But it's also, you know, a bit of also the kind of what's happening in Scotland in terms of, and then what do people do? What do young people do with that? It's not enough that they just get this knowledge. It's in a sense, for me, the idea is that you get an education so that you can become a success, particularly in the arts, that you can become a successful learner, because that's what the arts are really great at enabling. So it's kind of how could we as a sector work with both of those and maybe nick a bit of what's going on, if we're in England, nick a bit of what's happening in Scotland, but also maybe if you're in Scotland, being conscious of that sense that there is actually great art out there, and it's how you don't lose that sense of engaging with that without necessarily thinking there is the canon and you have to know the canon. It's more, there is stuff that is worth knowing about. So on that, my little polemic to finish, I'd really like to thank all four speakers. That's a really great start, I think. And the next stage of this process is for you to digest all this stuff, which I know has been quite intense, and have conversations in your tables around what's been talked about, and then come back in, how long do we have? We've got until, we've got about half an hour, haven't we? And then we'll take feedback from the tables and the panel will respond to the feedback from the tables. As a prompt to kind of, I'm sure you may not need it because there's been so much that's come out of this session, but we came out, discussed a question that might be helpful, and has the question emerged miraculously? Hurrah. So anyway, you may choose to go, that's not the question that we're interested in discussing. There was a far more important question that's come out of these conversations. But we will be thinking and continuing to reflect on these when we come back, after the break, so to speak. Great. So we now have 15 minutes, or just under actually, to feedback. And the idea was actually that we'd feedback from the table discussions, but I know that actually some people weren't having table discussions, which is absolutely fine. So rather, and actually in 15 minutes, realistically, we wouldn't, I think, be able to go around all the tables anyway. So what I'd like to suggest is that those who have a really burning point they want to make, or something that an observation or a question that they'd like to say, go ahead, and I'll try as far as possible to get as many responses as we can. So if people could keep it brief, I think then we've got a chance of getting more of a sense of what the range of discussions have been in the room. And I think we've got some roving mics. Are there roving mics? Oh, there they are. Sorry, I couldn't see you. Forgive me. So who would like to go first? If they could put their hands up. And go and put your hands up. Go on, because or else I'm just going to point. Oh, fantastic. Right there. And if you could say who you are and where you're from.
Okay, hi, Angela Rogers, Engage Cymru, Engage Wales. I've only just arrived, so sadly I haven't heard the presentations this morning, but from what I can gather, there's been lots of talk about the curriculum in England and Scotland in particular, and I just wanted to flag up, because I know we've got a lot of Welsh members, delegates in the audience here. For those who don't know, there's just been a fantastic Arts in Education review commissioned jointly by Culture and Education departments of the Welsh Government. And the recommendations are overwhelmingly positive for the value of arts in education. We, as a sector, are waiting to hear what happens next from the Welsh Government. So that was the first point. No, that's it for the moment. Thank you.
That's your first and your only point, which is a great point and very encouraging to hear. Thank you very much. Can we go to the centre table, please?
Anna Pedigan from Oriel Wrexham Gallery in Wrexham. Just carrying on from what Angela was saying there, I kind of put to our table here, based on that arts education review that Angela just mentioned, that does advocate for creativity being at the core of a school's, as you were nodding and know, the core of a school's learning, if you like, and curriculum, and that everything can be taught creatively. Maths can be, all the other subjects can be. And I just kind of put to the table what that might look like and how we might help a school to recognise how that could be. So I could maybe pass you over to some people on our table, or if anyone would like to mention anything that was mentioned, that'd be great. There was lots of ideas. Throw some ideas back at me. We've talked about Arts Award, and people talked about, Arts Award hasn't sort of officially come into Wales yet, but we have already started training ourselves in it, if you like.
We've got a very complicated, but I think perhaps what at the centre is giving teachers confidence that art is important, and then thinking about ways to establish that. Would you agree?
Yeah, one of the things that the report brings up is how few hours, in teacher training, something like average of 6 to 8 hours to teach the arts, with an S. So that's not a lot of time, obviously, and suggests that there's a lot of underconfident teachers being produced, if you like, and how we support them.
Great. Thank you very much. Over in the corner.
Hello, my name's Oliver Sumner. I'm independent, currently working with Contemporary Visual Arts Network in the South East. We've just been, a point I wanted to bring up with the table and just mention now is obviously there's many ways to support young people, but one way to support young people is to improve the relationships between the visual arts sector and schools and teachers, both through the CPD work that we do, but also in the sometimes I think the teaching profession and the gallery sector are speaking a slightly different language. I think there's a lot more work to be done there. And also galleries have told me in the Southeast, and visual arts organisations have told me in the Southeast that they're finding with the growth of academies and free schools and the reducing influence of local authorities, that it's very difficult to know how to access schools and just even to get the conversation going in large enough numbers. And I think it's quite typical that visual arts organisations end up working with quite small numbers of schools that they do have a relationship with, and more often than not, that relationship really depends on one art teacher rather than on an organisational level. So really my question is, how could we form some sort of more organised structure so that a gallery, large or small, would know who has Artsmark and who in the area is really keen to be working with their local arts organisations.
Great, that's really helpful. Can we come to this table in the corner? I'm trying to take notes of these, and then when we've done that, we'll get a response from the panel to these.
Hi, I'm Gwenno Jones from North Wales, another Welsh one. I just wanted to mention a project that we're doing across North Wales based on a project that was done with GEM and Cymal, I think, the museums organisation in Wales. It's looking at the Welsh Baccalaureate, which is very different to the English one. It's a subject in its own right, more based on the European Baccalaureate. And we're doing a piece of research with galleries and cultural venues on how they can assist in delivering the Welsh Bac, which means that we will produce a toolkit by March that secondary schools will be able to use. The Welsh Bac enables creative teaching in Wales, which is very different to, or a little bit different, I think, to the EBAC in England. Another project that we've been doing is Criw Celf, which is developing more able and talented young people from Key Stage 2 up to A-level in the creation and thinking about, but more specifically in producing their own artwork. So it's all about the making, it was very interesting what you were saying about that it's the working with an artist to make a piece of artwork. And that's been now rolled out across Wales. So we're working very, very strongly in the arts in Wales with schools, with education, and it's a very positive climate for us at the moment.
Good, that sounds great. Can I come to this table here and then that table there? Only she was first.
My name's Veronica Reinhardt from the Max Reinhardt Charitable Trust. We're currently looking at trying to develop a project where we get museums and teachers from schools to talk together more about how they can work together on the new curriculum. So I'm very interested to hear from many delegates here who've got more thoughts and ideas as to how that programme might work and how we might use the money that we've got to facilitate that. But I'd also we talked about how we inspire teachers, and I did wonder, and I wonder what the panel thought about whether we work more, whether it's worth museums and galleries working more with teacher training organisations so that people from the galleries go on and inspire the would-be teachers, because they're the ones who have to go on and inspire the kids. And if they know about it from teacher training, they can take that with them, whatever school they go to thereafter.
Great. Written that down. This table here.
I'm Gregory from Camden Arts Centre. I just wanted to make sure that it's also addressed that we spent quite a lot of time talking about the disadvantages and the changes of the curriculum towards pupils with additional learning needs of various natures. Not only obviously is the new approach to the national curriculum a disadvantage to children with various SEN needs and additional learning needs, but also people at this table have a lot of knowledge about the broader slashed budgets for schools or increased expectations from schools in providing learning support, but also the increasing difficulty that there is for pupils to get a statement. I don't know if if you wanted to add a bit more to that.
Hi, Liz Porter. I don't know very much, but from what I can gather of the government's changes that are coming into the SEN provision later next year, and it's still got a long way to go, because I don't think a lot of people really know what it means, but it does mean that schools will have less money. They'll be much harder for people to get statements, and one of the things that we were talking about here was, what does this mean for pupils who are fall within the, where there's the gap between those that are able to do things and those that are not, so find learning much more difficult, where they need a bit of support but they're not getting it, with no arts there. Well, not so much arts there. What does it actually mean?
Great, thank you. I think we can
Could I just add one tiny little thing that we talked about, positive. So positive option is that if schools are expected to deliver less when it comes to the arts, and particularly around film or differentiated learning, that whether that's a gap that teachers will recognise and that makes arts organisations more attractive to work with if they are able to provide things that is not within the school curriculum.
Great, thank you. We've probably got time for two more, so can we go to the lady over there?
Hello, I'm Fiona Feber from Space. We're based in East London, and we're slightly different in so much as we're not a gallery or a museum. We're at the other end. We're a studio provision organisation for visual artists. And I run something, part of the programme I run is a creative learning in artist studio programme, where we bring children, students into artist studios and the teachers. And something really interesting happens, and it connects with something that Laura said about the art room being not a refuge, a sanctuary. And I think that what's really interesting that happens there is that the studio becomes a completely non-hierarchical place. It's not school, it's not a gallery, it's not, you know, there's nothing there. And it's some quite extraordinary exchanges, just dialogue really, can happen there. And it's to do with children seeing what do artists look like? You know, what do artists do all day, to coin a phrase? And what do they make and how does it work? So it's about questioning and exploring really. But I think that just that idea of having a space, this kind of liminal almost space, which provides a completely different platform for thinking and creativity.
Fantastic. One more. Sorry, very hard decision. Can we go to the middle table at the back? That lady's got her hand up.
Hi, my name is Ros from Reba. We have already given a point from our table, so I'm sorry to take the last point, but we did have one thing that we talked about quite a lot in response to how we can work positively in light of the new kind of policy developments. And one of the things that we felt was becoming more and more apparent is the pressure that pupils are actually feeling from their parents to not take up creative subjects at GCSE level, and how we can help provide them with the language and the evidence to be able to kind of give back to their parents, to be able to say, it's worth doing this. And one of the things that we've started to do at Reba is to actually start to help, trying to kind of rebrand our offer in terms of essentially kind of offering something very, very similar, but approaching teachers by saying this is the kind of key element of this offer that will help your students sign on to your course is that you will get to meet artists, they will get to meet artists, they will get to meet architects, they will get to meet other professionals in the arts world that will help them understand the different jobs available to them that aren't just architect, artist, gallery owner, that there are a whole plethora of different jobs. And that's been responded to really positively. And I'm sure that everybody else, even if you don't have artist studios, could kind of do that because you have teams who are arts professionals in one way or another.
Fantastic. Well, that is, I'm sure there's a lot more out there, so I'm sorry to cut us off. But I think we've certainly got stuff that we as a panel could address. I've tried to note down some of the things that I've picked up just from that really quick exchange. I think there's something about galleries providing very specific kind of support in the form of toolkits or CPD, working with teacher training, working with funders, and providing support, particularly in relation to SEN. Then I think there's another issue, a sort of wider kind of philosophical issue, I think, which is also about, maybe there's the wrong language, but the galleries providing an alternative space. So the idea that was mentioned over there, actually in relation to studios, but I think also applies to galleries, that it isn't a formal education context as such. So we are able to provide something that schools aren't. We can be an alternative. And in that we can also support people to most obviously meet artists and engage with contemporary practice or things like that. And also that we can work in thinking about a different language, and actually not necessarily a different language in terms of acting in opposition to teachers, but working with teachers to think about what we do, but phrased in a different language, perhaps. So what I'd like to do is, in my bossy chair way, is I'd like to think of, actually ask particular panel members to think about different aspects of that. And Leslie, if I could look to you, particularly to respond to how you feel about the area around CPD or the provision of toolkits or that area of support.
Okay, yes, I mean, that I think is the way forward. I mean, NSCAD is also a trade union, and I have to say it's extremely hard out there at the moment for teachers. It's not just about sort of art and design, not just about the subject, but performance-related pay, all sorts of things are landing amongst the profession at the moment, and morale is very, very low. So in terms of the museum and gallery sector providing that sort of third space, which I think our colleague over there was talking about, where our teachers can go and have their confidence raised, to be able to quote Darren Henley, shine the light back on the subject and to make tacit knowledge explicit. Our teachers are fantastic at knowing what they're doing, but just to be able to talk up the subject to a variety of stakeholders, not just to themselves, not just to other artists, makers, designers, but to politicians, to parents, to governors, to the head of department, to the head teacher when they're sort of trying to wrangle budgets. So using the museum and gallery sector as a third space, fantastic. And I mean, Engage has a great network system, and there is a sort of an emerging grassroots sort of growing groups of networks of teachers, art teachers growing around the country that we're trying to nurture. We haven't initiated them. They're happening because when times get hard, people come out together and sort of stand around the water cooler and kind of talk. And people our teachers are now gathering in other schools and in galleries. There's a great model in the Baltic with Meaton, the North East Art Teachers Network, that just happens because it wants to. There's no money floating around it, it's just there and it's being nurtured. I mean, I'm sure there are other models, and if you're running one, I'm sorry if I don't know about it, but certainly the gallery as a third space for teachers is really, I think, where the direction of travel could be.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Now, Joan, what I'd wonder if you could respond to is particularly that idea that you could develop, how in Scotland is it that you're thinking about developing a kind of common language, given that you've talked about this challenge of trying to kind of shift into a different way of working. Have you come up against this issue of language?
Absolutely, absolutely we have. And we're still struggling. I mean, it's moved on, but we're still definitely in that territory. I mean, it started off, I suppose, we got down to serious discussion about it in about 2010, when the agencies were starting to get on board and think, yes, we are up for this, but actually, what do we mean by creativity and what is it? And, you know, you can get seriously bogged down in that. So that is part of the journey, you know, the extent to which these national organisations can be comfortable with comfortable enough with the definition or the way we have it described at the moment to allow them to take a risk to move on. I'm not saying we have the definitive answers at the moment. We've certainly come a long way and they are all signed up to it. So, for example, we started off, as you will be well aware, there are reams of academic journals and treatises about what is creativity. We started off from the place with Ken Robinson's nice little succinct one, which is, if I can get this right, imagination is the capacity for original thought and creativity is applied imagination. That was our starting point. Then we got on with a bit further. I think I quoted to you already some of the things that were said in this book about what is creativity. So it's about it's the capacity to generate ideas that have value to the individual, to look at familiar things with a fresh eye, to examine problems with an open mind, make connections, learn from mistakes, use imagination to explore new possibilities. Ultimately, creativity is the ability to make the world anew, to shape the future and enrich the here and now. So that might be a bit long-winded, but that's kind of where we are now. That's kind of what everybody is happy with and signed up with. Hopefully we'll get to something more succinct. Something else I should mention to you, which I didn't mention before, is that apart from these documents that I've already mentioned, Education Scotland, which is the National Agency for Curriculum Development, they, as part of our work under the Creative Learning, themselves, every so often they do reviews of different aspects of learning across the curriculum. So they just published in September their review of creativity across learning. And so they did a further bit of definition about what they thought. And this is, of course, sort of teachers' manuals. This is the place where teachers go to look to what they should be doing and how they should be developing. And they came up with 4 key themes. One was being constructively inquisitive, being open-minded, able to harness imagination, and able to identify and solve problems. And there's other sort of subsections underneath those, but those are the 4 headings. So you can see how that all, you know, the work that we all do applies to these criteria, but so does, you know, good teaching in maths and science and every other subject. And that's the point that this report is making. It is publicly available online on the Education Scotland website, Creativity Across Learning 3 to 18, if you are interested. So that's kind of where we are with that language.
And I think it's interesting because I think it is about, if much of that language I don't think would be challenging for any of us. So, you know, and I think a lot of the great art teachers that I've come into contact with, it's not unfamiliar to them. So it's about finding ways of connecting across terms and language like that.
Can I just make one other point, because I think it is quite important, because it's one of the other changes and the shifts that part of all this work has kind of brought more into focus. And it is a shift from that place that I described sort of 10 years ago, where we were very much kind of defending the arts, or saying, you know, jumping up and down in our lonely little corners that the arts are important, to a place where actually artistic practice is leading the way in this kind of thinking, because you're right, arts practice is very comfortable with all that kind of language. And we're in the place now where that language is in the process of becoming more comfortable across other subject areas, but of course then the danger and the balance is not to lose the expressive arts expertise in that mix. So it's keeping that balance always to the fore.
And maybe this is a good point, Laura, just to ask you, and particularly in relation to that sense of what role the artist plays in this.
I do a lot of work experience for kids. They come in, I suppose, age 15, and they come and work with me for a couple of weeks. And I think that the interesting thing is they have kind of idea of what an artist is and what they do, and then they're kind of amazed that you're just doing this thing. You're in the studio, nobody's asked you to do it. You're just doing it. So they go, who's paid you? Who's who's bought all these materials? What the hell are you doing? They end up sort of asking the question. So because it's this idea of a goal, you're going towards a goal, and you're going towards exhibitions, you're going to ever greater heights, whereas actually you might just be in a kind of studio in the East End and never actually do many shows, but you're still an artist. And, you could do a kind of enormous amount of failure. I get them to work on things, and I say, well, I might throw that away after 2 weeks. Is it all that work and you're going to throw it away? I said, well, I might if it doesn't work. Yeah. So, but I think that sense of, that's extraordinary to them. And I think that's something to bring into schools, really.
Yeah, and that, again, I think that providing of an alternative, that notion of a different way of thinking of why you're learning, and you're not learning just to pass your GCSE.
And you could be learning through failure as well.
And finally, Lizzie, I'm not going to let you leave. The thing that I wondered if you could respond to is that notion of how do we speak to, it came up in the context of here, of speaking to funders, but whether we could broaden it out of how do we speak to policymakers, how do we speak to key stakeholders in order to make the case in a way. You touched on it earlier, but
I think it's really interesting. We spend a lot of time trying to get to the table in lots of different ways. And I think there's lots of different levers and increasingly different language that you just have to sort of pull out depending on who you're talking to and how you want to do it. in terms of making change in terms of policy, I mean, those things where you're sort of talking about how do you make a relationship with schools, that relationship with a head teacher or a subject leader in schools is your first way in. And that it used to be easier. You used to be able to go to a local authority and they would help you do it. A lot of those colleagues in local authorities have disappeared, and it is a huge amount of work to try and work out who the movers and shakers and people with energy in your local schools are. But schools do have that sort of local practice and policy, sort of personal agency that we can tap into. I think when we're talking from cultural organisations' point of view, use your boards. Your boards have got amazing untapped power, and we've sort of found over the last couple of years that we've been able to go to cultural organisations and find people who can pick up the phone to, you know, the chief executive of Ofsted or to Michael Gove and say, hello, we'd like a meeting. And they have sort of that kind of power that if you're working on a sort of civil service point of view, you don't always have. So look at the assets that surround you and see if you know someone who knows someone, because they can often get in when you can't. The middle level, which is that sort of constant consultation, making the point, advocating for the value of arts and culture to national government and to local government, does feel like a grind. And it often feels like, oh, are we making any difference? We've made these cases so many times, we've written so many submissions. And my general thinking is the gains we make are small, but they're really important. And it's really important that we're at those tables and we're having those discussions. So the two live things at the moment are GCSEs, currently being reformed, huge thing. I don't know if people saw last week, Ofqual put out a statement that sort of said new GCSEs will be linear. They will be assessed at the end of 2 years by a 3.5-hour exam, which will probably be written. You know, this is the kind of policy which we have to be going in saying, actually, even though that rubric might not work for our sector, our subject should be a GCSE because it's equally important to all the other subjects that are out there. It needs that parity, it needs that status. We can find better ways of assessing it and better ways of delivering it, but it has to remain in the school curriculum, there at Key Stage 4 and at GCSE. And it sort of goes back to this point about the alternative space. We absolutely need both. And sometimes I feel like there's a slight danger of us sort of talking about the brilliant work that can happen in places like your studio or in a gallery. That must be there, but it must be alongside brilliant work that's happening in schools and is delivered by teachers in schools. And we've got to sort of pull ourselves into a place where we recognise and support that practice. I want to say one tiny more thing, if I've got time, which is to speak to the SEN agenda, because particularly in terms of the GCSE stuff and that model that I've just outlined, I think it is becoming hugely and obviously apparent that that's not going to be something that is fair and equal for all young people to achieve against. It doesn't look to young people's particular needs, young people's particular learning styles. And I'd really like to do some work over the next couple of months. If colleagues in the room want to come and work on it with us, that would be great. Looking at some of the new rubrics for GCSEs and doing an equalities impact assessment where we say, actually, will these work for all learners? And if not, why not? And get some real evidence to back up some of those arguments. Because I think the imperative to look at equality seems to be slipping off the agenda in terms of educational reform, and we must bring it to the fore.
Great. That's a good place to stop. Good rousing place. Can I just, again, thank all 4 speakers. That was absolutely fantastic. And let's roll on with the rest. Great. Thank you.